Good morning, everyone. If you have a Bible, turn to Acts chapter 17. Acts chapter 17. And as you make your way there, it's good to see everyone this morning. Good to be here gathered. It's good to have family in town. My sister is here this morning, so that's been good. And I hope that all of you have enjoyed this weekend, time with family, hopefully. But now here we get to come together with the family of God. And it's a wonderful thing to gather around this table together and share in this meal that is the body and blood of our Lord Jesus Christ. I don't know if you've seen these movies, but in the series Pirates of the Caribbean, the main character, Jack Sparrow, or I should probably say Captain Jack Sparrow, has this compass, right? This special compass, and it's not a compass that points, north, south, east, and west. It's a compass that points to whatever his heart most wants. It points to the thing that he most desires. And so throughout this series, it leads him on all kinds of crazy, wild, and often dangerous adventures as he is in search for the thing that he most wants, the thing that promises to bring all of the happiness or all of the meaning in life that he's really looking for. And yet, time and time again, what we find in this movie series is that he often comes up empty and unfulfilled. And I think that describes so many people today, maybe at some point all of our lives, where we may not have a compass that points to the thing that our heart most wants, but we follow our heart in such a way that we move after what our heart most wants, the thing that we desire most, the thing that we think will promise to give us the meaning, the purpose, the identity, the belonging, the hope, the satisfaction that we're really searching for in life. And as a result, that leads us on all kinds of crazy and wild and often dangerous adventures as we are in desperate search for what our heart most wants. And often it's the case that we come up empty and unfulfilled. I think this is how Paul describes our world in Acts 17. So there in Acts chapter 17, Paul, he finds himself in the city of Athens. And Paul's point here, I believe, is that which all humanity so desperately tries to find is found in the person of Jesus. That which all humanity so desperately tries to find is found in the person of Jesus. Now, when Paul comes to the city of Athens, this is not just some random city in the ancient world. This is one of the most well-known cities, even by today's standards. And while you can go and visit there today, you can go there and you can imagine its former glory. It's just a pile of ruins now. There is a vibrant city there, but the temple and all the infrastructure of ancient Athens is lying there in ruins. But you can imagine how beautiful this city once was. It was home to some of the world's most famous philosophers, from Plato to Socrates. Aristotle named it as his own home. And it is said by many that no ancient city has shaped our Western world more than the city of Athens. And so here Paul comes to this very well-known city. And it's interesting that in verse 21, if you just look in verse 21, it says, "Now all the Athenians and all the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new." Does that sound like our world today? People always searching for something new. Here we are in the age of technology, the digital world, where we have all the information of the world at our fingertips, and we're constantly doom scrolling for more, right? We want to know what's new, what's more. And if it's old news, then we want nothing to do with it. Well, the Athenians were much the same way, always searching for something new. But they were not only a city that was known for their novelty and wisdom and intelligence, they were also a city that was deeply spiritual. In fact, it was said of ancient Athens that it was easier there to find a god than a man. And that was because when you looked out at Athens, it was like a forest of idols. In fact, if you go there today, you can see the ruins of the altars upon which was once mounted these idols, these ancient gods. This forest of idols, that's who the Athenians were. And so in this city, it says in verse 16, picking up in verse 16 now, it says that while Paul was in the city of Athens, he was greatly distressed to see this sight, this forest of idols, this city that was full of idols. Now, think about that for a moment. Why would Paul be so deeply distressed about that? You know, when we hear the word idol, we immediately associate it with things that we read about from the Old Testament. We realize that idolatry leads people astray from God, and it often does so much harm to those who worship these idols. But in the ancient world, the idols were seen as just sources of meaning and power that you could tap into. And in that sense, it's not unlike so much of what we have in our world today. That idols were where people could find that meaning and satisfaction, and by offering yourself, presenting yourself before an idol, that would give you the thing that your heart most wants. And in another sense, in this city full of idols, we would think, well, why wouldn't that in some way be a good thing, right? Here's this city full of idols where it's easier to find a god than a man. And so the idea is that, well, you just worship whatever God gives you the source of meaning that you're looking for. So you worship your God, I'll worship mine. And we live in this pluralistic culture where we can be tolerant of one another's gods as long as we don't interfere with anyone's harm, if we don't interfere with anyone else's freedom. And therefore, you can worship your God that gives you the meaning and identity that you're looking for, and I'll worship the God that gives me the satisfaction and hope that I'm looking for. That's ancient Athens. But here's what Paul realized. Paul realizes that while the freedom to choose is good, whatever we choose to worship becomes our master. Whatever we choose to worship becomes our master. And here's the thing, this is not just a biblical concept that Paul introduces. This is widely known by even secular people today. So in 2005, the postmodern novelist David Foster Wallace spoke at a graduation ceremony, giving the commencement speech. And there in this address to the student body, he wrote these words. Though he wasn't a Christian himself, he says something that was so insightful about this idea of what we worship. He says, here's something that's weird but true. In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is actually no such thing as atheism. There's no such thing as not worshiping. Everybody worships. The only choice that we get is what to worship. And he says, pretty much anything you worship will eat you alive. Worship money and things. If that's where you find real meaning and purpose in life, then you'll need ever more stuff to satisfy your thirst for more. Worship your own body and beauty and allure, then you'll need to ever be more and more beautiful. And by the time that age finally catches up to you, you'll die a million deaths in the process. Worship power. If that's where you find meaning, then you'll need ever more power to feel in control. Or worship your intellect, he says, and you'll always feel like a fraud on the verge of being found out. I think this is why Paul is so deeply distressed to see this city full of idols. Because he knows whatever you choose to worship becomes your master, and almost anything you worship eventually comes to eat you alive. It takes and takes and takes. And so verse 17, Paul, it says he reasoned in the synagogue with both the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks, as well as the marketplace, day by day, with those who happened to be there. And then it says a group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" And others remarked, "He seems to be advocating for foreign gods." And they said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Now click save on that. Preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Whatever's going on here, Paul believes that in this forest of idols, there's something unique and special about the person of Jesus. There's something unique about his life and death and resurrection that sets him apart from all the other gods that they could worship in Athens. And so verse 19, they took him and they brought him to the Areopagus, where the city leaders and philosophers would gather. And they led him there saying, "May we know what this new teaching is that you're presenting." There they are, always after something new. And so, verse 22, Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, 'To the unknown God.'" Now, so much could be said about that title, "To the unknown God." But it's almost like the Athenians, they feel like something is missing. Here they are, a city full of idols where it's easier to find a God than a man, so spiritually open, so many sources of meaning and purpose to tap into and to gain what they're looking for from, so much to derive from, and yet it's not enough. They still feel like something is missing, this unknown God. And I feel like that's descriptive of so many people today. We may not think of them as gods or idols, but hearkening back to Lawrence's lesson from a couple weeks ago, there are sources of meaning and identity and purpose that we tap into that become like the gods and the idols that we serve. And here we are in this age where we have everything we want at our fingertips, and yet we still feel that sense that something is missing, this unknown God. But in the midst of that, look at what Paul says next. He says, "What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. That the God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him, though he is actually not far from each one of us. For," he says, "in him we live and move and have our being. As even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring." I want to just stop and marvel at those words for a moment. I don't know how you have thought about God throughout your life, but for me, I always had the sense that God was distant and far off. That he created the world, he set things in motion, but for the most part, he was distant, and at times he might intervene in human history, but the God that Paul describes here is a God that is carefully involved in human affairs, right? Guiding history along, determining the portions where people live and the boundaries of their dwelling place and the timing in which all this should take place. And what's the point? Why did God arrange all of the world this way? Well, Paul says, so that people could perhaps seek after him. and feel their way toward him, like almost searching in the darkness, and find him, though he's not far from any one of us. For he says, in him we live and move and have our being. A God that is close and near and involved, that we should actually find him. But as awesome as that thought is, I think Paul's actually doing something even more profound here. Did you notice how he says, he quotes some of their philosophers? Do you notice? He says, as some of your own poets have said. And what Paul is quoting here, he's alluding to a quote from Epimenides that was written in 600 BC. And it says, I'll read this quote, and as I read it, I want you to just see if it sounds familiar at all to you. Epimenides writes, they fashioned a tomb for thee, O high and holy one. But thou art not dead, thou livest and abidest forever. For in thee we live and move and have our being. Do you see what Paul is doing here? Here, Paul, he comes to the Areopagus gathered with the brightest minds of his day, these philosophers standing in their midst, and he quotes from their own philosopher poets saying, that unknown God that you're searching for, the unknown God has made himself known in the person of Jesus, the true, high, and holy one. And though he was laid in a tomb, though a tomb was fashioned for him, he is not dead. He lives and abides forever, for in him we live and move and have our being. And so here's what Paul is pointing us to as we come to the table. That which all humanity so desperately tries to find is found in the person of Jesus, who has come to find you. I believe in some sense, every person, right, they have that compass that they're following, their heart's desires, searching for the thing that they want most, the thing that promises to give them meaning and purpose and identity and worth and satisfaction. And yet, it's like that unknown God, always searching for something more, never quite enough, always coming up empty and unfulfilled. But Paul arrives at a city much like ours today and says that unknown God that you're searching for, that your heart most wants, the compass that is guiding your life, ultimately finds its true north in him. And the good news is that this is not a God like the gods of antiquity where you have to climb the mountaintop to reach them. We have a God who's come down. The unknown God has made himself known in the person of Jesus. And by his life and death and resurrection, the one who lives and abides forever is the one in whom we live, the one in whom we find life, the one in whom we find the purpose and meaning and satisfaction and what our heart truly wants most. In him, we live and move and have our being. So as we meditate on that now, we'll ask the men to come forward as we partake.